Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Wednesday, 23rd April, 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. Japan faces a confluence of domestic and international pressures, beginning with rising rice prices that have led to the first rice imports from South Korea in 25 years. The finance ministry, while maintaining its economic outlook, is wary of risks, especially those stemming from U.S. tariffs. Efforts to combat fraud may include allowing police to create undercover bank accounts under false names. There are growing concerns about anesthesiologist staffing as epidural use during labor increases. Jetstar Japan was fined for insufficient cabin crew breaks, a first for flight attendants' rest time. The Japanese Self-Defense Forces, SDF, concluded disaster relief in Myanmar, delivering 2.5 tons of supplies to a Japanese medical team in Mandalay. Approximately 70 Japanese lawmakers visited Yasukuni Shrine for its spring festival. Leaders of Japan and the Netherlands have committed to stronger security and economic ties via a new action plan. Turning to China, a Chinese man was executed for the fatal stabbing of a 10-year-old Japanese schoolboy in Shenzhen last September, a stark reminder of the complexities in Sino-Japanese relations. Japan is also making significant investments in artificial intelligence, AI, with the government promising over $50 trillion, $350 billion in funding over the next decade. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang has been actively advocating for investment in AI infrastructure, meeting with Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and members of the LDP to discuss the power generation needs of AI development. Navigating complex international relationships, Japan balances ties with China, its largest trading partner, and the U.S., its formal security ally. Politician Ishiba met with new U.S. ambassador to Japan George Glass and sent a letter to Xi Jinping. The U.S. has labeled Japan's currency as undervalued, sparking talk of a potential Plaza Accord too. Finance chief Katsunobu Kato traveled to Washington to discuss currency issues with U.S. representatives following a drop of the dollar below 140 yen. The country mourned the death of Pope Francis, recognizing his lifelong dedication to peace, including his visits to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Atomic bomb survivors were among those expressing grief. Culturally, Japan is witnessing a yuzu boom and exploring the influence of impermanence. Otaku culture has redefined obsession and influenced cultural norms. Several exciting cultural figures in Japan are of Korean descent. In Myanmar, the aforementioned Japanese Self-Defense Forces, SDF, concluded disaster relief operations, delivering 2.5 tons of supplies to a Japanese medical team in Mandalay following the earthquake. The leaders of Japan and the Netherlands agreed to strengthen security and economic ties based on a new action plan, signaling a deepening relationship. In Papua New Guinea, the Under-19 men's cricket team is participating in the Under-19 Cricket World Cup, East Asia Pacific Division, one qualifier currently being held in Japan. South Korea, in a noteworthy development, exported rice to Japan for the first time in 25 years, addressing rising prices and consumer anger in the latter nation. From the United Kingdom, AI startup Wave debuted in Japan after partnering with Nissan Motor to develop the next generation of its ProPilot driver assist system, marking an interesting cross-national collaboration in the automotive technology sector. The United States has asserted that Japan's currency is undervalued, initiating debate about a potential Plaza Accord to New U.S. Ambassador to Japan George Glass arrived in Tokyo and met with politician Ishiba. Japan's finance chief, Katsunobu Kato, departed for Washington to discuss currency issues with U.S. representatives, highlighting ongoing economic discussions between the two nations. Ukraine and Russia. Amidst the ongoing conflict, Ukraine reported 6 deaths from Russian attacks in the past day, with Russian drones heavily targeting Odessa. Russia resumed attacks after an Easter truce. However, Russia and Ukraine have signaled a willingness to engage in direct talks, potentially facilitated by Donald Trump. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov indicated Vladimir Putin's readiness to discuss halting attacks on civilian infrastructure with Volodymyr Zelensky. Putin himself hinted at the possibility of direct talks, acknowledging complexities, but expressing a positive outlook on peace negotiation. Ukrainian, British, French, and US officials convened in London to discuss the war, highlighting international engagement in the conflict. The Kremlin has welcomed the U.S. position that Ukraine will not be allowed into NATO. United States. The United States faces a range of domestic and international issues. The Trump administration and Iran have renewed interest in a nuclear deal after Trump exited the previous agreement, with negotiations progressing to the expert level. Tensions persist with China over trade, as evidenced by a clash between US and Chinese ambassadors in Fiji regarding President Trump's tariff policy. The U.S. has finalized tariffs on solar imports from Southeast Asia, affecting major manufacturers, including China's Jinko Solar and Trina Solar. Boeing investors are concerned about the impact of Trump's tariffs, after jets intended for a Chinese airline were returned to the U.S. from Boeing's China finishing center. The U.S. has warned allies against using Chinese satellites due to security risks. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced a proposed reorganization of the U.S. State Department, aiming to close overseas missions, reduce staff, and minimize offices promoting liberal values. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth defended his use of the Signal app, blaming leaks on ousted Pentagon officials and suggesting an internal investigation is underway. Previously, President Donald Trump defended Hegseth amid reports that Hegseth shared information about U.S. strikes in Yemen with family members in a Signal group chat, prompting Democrats to call for Hegseth's resignation. Jerome Powell, the U.S. Federal Reserve boss, is at odds with President Trump over interest rate cuts. J.D. Vance warned of a potentially dark future for humanity depending on global trade and partnerships, while emphasizing the importance of the U.S.-India partnership. Republican-led states are targeting driver's licenses issued to immigrants who are in the U.S. illegally. A U.S. senator met with Mohsen Matawi, a pro-Palestine student activist detained at Columbia University. The wife of former U.S. Senator Bob Menendez has been convicted in a bribery scheme. International trade and relations. The global landscape is shaped by trade tensions and evolving alliances. The IMF has slashed Australia's economic growth forecast for 2025 by $13 billion, with real GDP growth predicted to drop to 1.6% from 2.1%, raising fears that Treasury is underestimating the impact of Donald Trump's trade war. US Vice President J.D. Vance met with Indian PM Narendra Modi for trade talks, reporting significant progress as New Delhi seeks to avoid Trump's tariffs, underscoring the importance of the US-India partnership. Chinese universities dominate global research on chips, according to a US report. British PM Keir Starmer praised Ukrainian resilience during a training program. China faces a complex economic and geopolitical landscape. The IMF has reduced China's growth forecast for the current year to 4% due to increasing economic uncertainty. Despite a reported 5.4% year-on-year GDP growth in the first quarter, tax revenue is falling. In response to trade tensions, particularly with the U.S., China is accelerating the rollout of its own payment system to decrease reliance on the dollar-based global financial system. The Politburo is expected to meet to address tariffs imposed by the U.S. The country is relying on its vast domestic market to support exporters weathering the tariff storm. China is also fast-tracking university majors to counter the trade war's impact and achieve technical self-reliance. Nearly 2 million private firms were added in the first quarter, with 40% of registrations in emerging sectors and new technologies. China's exports of critical metals have plummeted due to trade war curbs, pressuring the U.S. tech sector. Amid these tensions, China has restricted the export of rare earth elements, raising concerns for countries like India. Vietnam is acting to curb illegal transshipment of US-bound goods due to concerns about Chinese origin, as Washington accuses Chinese companies of using Vietnam as a transshipment hub to dodge US duties. China is also active on the technology front. CATL is developing cheaper, faster recharging, and longer-range batteries for electric vehicles. China is also reported to have cracked another quantum code barrier, raising concerns about data security. China is setting critical rules to ensure the safety of self-driving EVs after a fatal crash involving Xiaomi. However, a humanoid robot half-marathon put technology's limits on public display, with many robots struggling. China's J-36 design team unveiled an aircraft carrier landing system for 6th-gen stealth jets. In foreign relations, China has expressed its willingness to continue improving ties with the Vatican, where an estimated 10 to 12 million Catholics reside. China also expressed condolences over the death of Pope Francis, seeking continued improvement of relations, including its deal on appointing Catholic bishop. However, the future of relations remains uncertain due to unresolved issues and possible policy shifts under the next pope. China has increased its outreach to Taiwan through state-supported business events, with Taiwan-based NGO reporting a 3% increase in Taiwanese attendees compared to 2023. China could play a role in European security if the U.S. retreats, depending on the outcome of the Ukraine war. China's KJ-500 radar aircraft is overseas for the first time in a joint drill with Egypt, furthering defense ties. China is also taking steps to promote environmental sustainability. It is accelerating the issuing of green electricity certificates while increasing inspections of heavy emitters. Its solar panel makers are exploring options as Washington sets tariffs for Southeast Asia, including overseas factory deployment. Domestically, China needs to unleash more of its spending power, particularly in childcare, healthcare, and elderly care. Turning to the United States, the country is engaged in a trade war with China. The U.S. is imposing tariffs that have led to a decrease in China's critical metal exports, putting pressure on the U.S. tech sector. Washington has openly accused Chinese companies of using Vietnam as a transshipment hub to dodge US duties. The U.S. scaling back its port fee plan has brought relief to Chinese shipyards. However, major shipping carriers face greater risks due to the removal of upper limits for levies. The IMF has also slashed GDP growth estimates for the U.S. as trade tensions rise. Air India is considering acquiring Boeing planes rejected by China as Trump's tariffs reshape aviation. The U.S. is setting tariffs for Southeast Asia, leading China's solar panel makers to explore options, including overseas factory deployment. In the latest from Taiwan, there has been increased outreach from China through state-supported business events. Taiwan-based NGO reported a 3% increase in Taiwanese attendees compared to 2023. Shifting focus to India, the country is concerned about the impact of China's restrictions on the export of rare earth elements. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, actions are being taken to curb illegal transshipment of US-bound goods. This is due to concerns about Chinese origin, as Washington accuses Chinese companies of using Vietnam as a transshipment hub to dodge US duties. In Egypt, the country is participating in a joint military drill with China. This involves China's KJ-500 radar aircraft, furthering defense ties. Regarding the Vatican, China has stated its willingness to continue improving ties. The Vatican is home to an estimated 10 to 12 million Catholics. China also expressed condolences over the death of Pope Francis, seeking continued improvement of relations, including its deal on appointing Catholic bishops. The future of relations remains uncertain due to unresolved issues and possible policy shifts under the next pope. Israel experienced continued conflict as an Israeli attack on a residential building in Khan Younis killed at least 11 Palestinians. Further violence occurred with another Israeli attack, resulting in fatalities at the al-Mawasi camp. The situation has led to critical food shortages in Gaza due to Israel's blockade of aid supplies. An Israeli attack in Lebanon killed a leader of al-Jamaah al-Islamiyah, increasing pressure on the Lebanese prime minister to disarm armed groups. Humanitarian agencies, including the UN, Palestine Red Crescent Society, PCS, and Gaza's Civil Defense Service, have rejected the Israeli military's investigation into the deaths of 15 Palestinian medics and rescue workers. In Rafah, dismissing the findings of professional failures and citing a lack of accountability. The main Palestinian rescue service in Gaza condemned the probe as a fabricated investigation. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich stated that eliminating Hamas's rule in Gaza is a higher priority than securing the release of hostages held by Hamas. Shin Bet chief Ronan Bar has accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of demanding illegal operations and pressuring him to spy on anti-government protesters. Iran alleges that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is attempting to sabotage nuclear talks with the US, while maintaining that Israel would never permit Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. The Vatican City mourns the passing of Pope Francis at the age of 88, following a 38-day hospitalization. Cardinal Kevin Farrell praised his fidelity, courage, and love, especially his dedication to marginalized communities. India and the United States have seen progress in finalizing a bilateral trade agreement, a topic discussed between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance in New Delhi, with Vance advocating for enhanced collaboration in defense, energy, and technology. Modi also hosted Vance's family for dinner during the visit, where they discussed India-U.S. ties. A new tariff on steel imports from China has been implemented for 200 days, marking a notable trade policy change. In other news, India secured 4 medals at the EGMO, an annual international mathematics competition held from April 11-17. Pope Francis maintained close ties with the Church in India and sought a resolution to the dispute over Mass liturgy in the Ernakulam and Gamali archdioceses. In Indian-administered Kashmir, gunmen opened fire on tourists, resulting in at least 24 deaths in what is suspected to be a terror attack amidst a military crackdown. Communal tensions between Hindus and Muslims in West Bengal are reportedly being exploited for political gain by rival parties. Turning to the United States, Vice President J.D. Vance met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi to discuss strengthening India-U.S. collaboration in defense, energy, and technology, and acknowledged significant advancements in discussions for a prompt bilateral trade agreement. Meanwhile, U.S. visas issued to Indian students declined by 30% during President Trump's first month in office, representing the largest decrease among top source countries. Venezuela is embroiled in controversy as its chief prosecutor accuses El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele of human trafficking. This accusation stems from Bukele's offer to exchange 252 Venezuelan migrants deported by the Trump administration for 252 political prisoners held in Venezuela. Meanwhile, the U.S. Trump administration's deportation policies face scrutiny. A U.S. judge questioned whether Venezuelan migrants were properly informed of their rights to challenge their removals, referencing Supreme Court precedents. The disappearance of Ricardo Prada Vasquez, a Venezuelan immigrant deported after attempting to re-enter the U.S., adds to the concerns. His family continues searching for answers regarding his whereabouts. The country also mourned the death of a beloved pastor at the Caracas Cathedral, recognized for his 4 decades of service. Additionally, Venezuela joined the global community in mourning the passing of Pope Francis, feeling a close connection to him in Caracas. The UK finds itself under scrutiny for travel restrictions, with critics arguing they harm the tourism industry. Simultaneously, some UK MPs and peers are campaigning against a potential invitation for former US President Donald Trump to address Parliament. Aiming to crack down on crime, Ofcom, the UK's communications regulator, is closing a loophole used by criminals to intercept mobile communications by banning the leasing of global title numbers. Meanwhile, a No 10 briefing alleges that Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, has changed his stance on the definition of women, specifically regarding trans women. In diplomatic news, Ukrainian officials are expected in London to discuss the U.S. peace plan. Turning to Ukraine, the nation is at the center of ongoing conflict. The Kremlin has announced Vladimir Putin is willing to hold direct talks with Ukraine, a significant shift after years of avoiding bilateral discussions. However, despite this willingness, the Kremlin refused to extend the Easter ceasefire. In response, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed Kyiv's readiness to engage in talks focused on stopping attacks on civilian areas. Australia recently held general elections, with housing affordability a major concern for voters. Experts predict that achieving affordable housing could take over 7 decades under current growth policies favored by leading parties. The Labour and coalition parties offer solutions to the housing crisis, but neither advocates for lower house prices. In a third debate, Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton clashed, with Albanese accusing Dutton of desperation regarding claims of dishonesty. Separately, former Australian cricketer Michael Slater received a suspended 4-year prison sentence for domestic violence, including choking a woman. Turning to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government faces increasing pressure over its carbon tax policy. Several provinces are challenging the tax's legality, arguing it infringes on provincial jurisdiction. The policy aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by imposing a tax on fuels, but critics claim it disproportionately impacts lower-income households. The Supreme Court is expected to rule on the matter soon, potentially reshaping Canada's climate change strategy. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is grappling with persistent inflation despite efforts to curb government spending. The Bank of England has raised interest rates multiple times, but inflation remains above the target rate. Economists are divided on whether further rate hikes are necessary, with some warning of a potential recession. Sunak's government is also facing scrutiny over its handling of post-Brexit trade negotiations with the European Union. The Northern Ireland Protocol continues to be a contentious issue, impacting trade and political stability. Thailand recently faced a postponement in trade negotiations with the United States regarding potential tariffs. The U.S. request for delay led Thailand to reassess critical points to avert a possible 36% tariff imposition. Meanwhile, in Thailand's legal sphere, 2 former prosecutors were convicted for their role in concealing evidence related to a 2012 Ferrari crash involving a Red Bull Air that resulted in the death of a police officer. Shifting to social matters, a Thai park ranger was terminated after a video surfaced depicting his adverse reaction to tourists greeting him in Mandarin, Ni hao, igniting public discourse on the suitability of his behavior. New Zealand First, a party in the governing coalition, proposed a bill defining gender based on biology, potentially excluding transgender individuals from legal recognition. Winston Peters, leader of New Zealand First, advocated for laws reflecting biological reality, dismissing woke ideology, and asserting the need for legal certainty. The bill's fate remains uncertain, pending random selection and majority support. Thousands of inter-country adoptions take place in New Zealand annually, mainly from the Pacific Islands and Southeast Asia, with most cases free from abuse or trafficking. Argentina mourned the passing of Pope Francis, as citizens gathered in churches to remember him. Before ascending to the papacy, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was known for his humility. He often visited impoverished areas in Argentina by bus. Ida Bogarin, 44, recalled his profound gesture of kissing the feet of the people. Services and open-air masses were held at the Buenos Aires Metropolitan Cathedral and other parishes. Experts believe Pope Francis avoided returning to Argentina as Pope to prevent political exploitation of his presence. Bangladesh has firmly denied India's accusations concerning the death of a Hindu leader, reiterating its dedication to protecting the rights of all citizens, regardless of religion. Meanwhile, Islamist factions in Bangladesh are pushing for the dismantling of the Women's Commission. They object to the Commission's proposals aimed at eradicating discriminatory practices against women. Hifazat-e Islam's Azizul Haq Islamabadi has emerged as a leading voice against these recommendations. Pope Francis's 2017 visit to Bangladesh included a meeting with Rohingya Muslim refugees from Myanmar. Saudi Arabia warmly welcomed Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Jeddah, marking the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister in 4 decades. At the invitation of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Modi's 2-day visit, which started on April 22, 2025, is expected to yield 6 memoranda of understanding between India and Saudi Arabia. Modi praised Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for his strong support of bilateral relations. He also urged Saudi companies to increase their investment in India. Discussions between the leaders included considerations for the Hajj quota. Canada is gearing up for a federal election slated for April 28, with the Liberal Party recently choosing former central banker Mark Carney as their leader, marking his debut in electoral politics. The Canadian political arena is also grappling with a rise in misinformation spread through platforms like Facebook, especially from right-leaning sources such as Canada Proud. Separately, alleged threats issued by Donald Trump have reportedly bolstered support for Quebec independence, a province known for its French-speaking population. Adding a unique twist, a scheduled political debate was strategically moved to avoid overlapping with a popular Canadians hockey game. Mexico is grappling with the aftermath of a racist attack, as the gunman responsible for the deaths of 23 people near the border has been sentenced to life in prison without parole after admitting to capital murder. Simultaneously, Mexico City's Scheinbaum has urged television stations to cease airing U.S. anti-immigration advertisement, denouncing it as discriminatory. The controversial advertisement featured Homeland Security Chief Kristi Noem and issued a warning to migrants regarding criminal activity. The world mourns in Vatican City as Pope Francis has died at the age of 88, marking the end of a 12-year papacy characterized by compassion, humility, and an inclusive spirit. Singapore is gearing up for its May 3 election, where the opposition parties are presenting a stronger slate of qualified candidates. This could potentially decrease the talent disparity often seen between them and the dominant People's Action Party. On a somber note, the country is in mourning following the death of Pupan Noor Aisha, the 91-year-old widow of Yusof Ishak, who is Singapore's inaugural president. She is remembered for her dignified presence and commitment to public service. Moving southwest to Fiji, Prime Minister Saitiveni Rabuka recently completed a trip to both Singapore and Indonesia. The specific reasons for the visits were not immediately disclosed. South Korea is weighing a proportional response to a Chinese platform in the Yellow Sea. This platform is viewed as a threat to existing bilateral agreements. It also indicates China's growing maritime ambitions in the region. Simultaneously, support is increasing for Li Jiaming ahead of the upcoming snap election. Acting President Han Duck-soo has not yet clarified his plans for the June 3 elections. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the St. Vincent de Paul Neuropsychiatric Hospital in Goma began offering free mental health consultations on March 24. This initiative addresses the widespread psychological trauma caused by the ongoing conflict. The M23 rebel group's clashes with the Congolese army have deeply affected the population. The hospital is struggling to meet the overwhelming demand, with numerous individuals seeking help daily for trauma-related conditions. Europe is witnessing a significant resurgence in its weapons manufacturing sector. Countries across the continent are re-evaluating their defense strategies. This involves increased domestic investment in military capabilities. The change comes amid a perceived shift in U.S. foreign policy under the former Trump administration. Vatican City is in mourning following the death of Pope Francis. The pontiff, the first non-European pope in over 1,000 years, passed away on Easter Monday due to a stroke. His tenure was marked by widespread popularity and significant reforms within the Catholic Church. France is actively combating harmful online trends, with digital media minister Clara Chapaz reporting the #skinnytop trend to regulators. She condemned the TikTok videos promoting extreme thinness as revolting and unacceptable, citing concerns about the normalization of anorexia. Meanwhile, Christian Carambeau, a celebrated former FIFA World Cup winner representing France, has lauded the Oceania Football Confederation's OFC commitment to football development. Carambeau specifically praised the EOFC's efforts during the U15 Boys Development Tournament held in Auckland, New Zealand. Germany's iconic Dick Marie, an ancient oak tree in Berlin, is struggling to survive due to a prolonged period of drought and the escalating impacts of climate change, worsening its already vulnerable state. Shifting focus to the United States, former Vice President Al Gore sharply denounced the Trump administration's stance on climate change, drawing a controversial parallel to Nazi Germany's manipulation of reality. Gore suggested the administration was creating its own preferred reality to avoid addressing the climate crisis. Vietnam is seeing significant foreign investment in its tech sector, with Sumitomo and SPI Holdings planning to acquire stakes in FPT-II. This investment coincides with FPT's plans to build an AI data center in Japan with an initial $200 million investment. In other news, Human Rights Watch has reported an expanding crackdown on freedom of expression in Vietnam, highlighting the imprisonment of social media users who criticize the government under Article 331. Malaysia is looking towards Africa for trade opportunities, drawn by its large economy and population as a buffer against potential U.S. tariffs. A recent health scare has reignited debate over vaping in Malaysia, where a teenager suffered a seizure after vaping. While 2 states have banned vaping, a national policy remains under consideration by the Health Ministry. Pakistan is facing both domestic tragedies and diplomatic hurdles. A fatal accident in southern Pakistan saw a speeding truck, overloaded with laborers, women, and children, crash into a ravine, resulting in at least 13 deaths and 20 injuries. Attempting to ease regional tensions, Ishaq Dar visited Kabul to improve strained relations with Afghanistan, which have recently been marred by hostility and refugee expulsions. Philippines has initiated a period of national mourning for the passing of Pope Francis, with memorial services planned across the archipelago. Concerns are mounting regarding the implementation of the novel online voting system, particularly its anticipated effect on voter participation among overseas Filipino workers WHAM during upcoming Philippine elections. Analysts stress the imperative of cultivating confidence in the system to bolster United States saw its ranking in the 2024 World Press Freedom Index decline, dropping 10 places to 55th. The report by Reporters Without Borders cited increasing constraints on journalism. Shifting focus to trade, former WTO chief Pascal Lamy described the current U.S.-China trade dynamic as a mutual embargo. Lamy stressed the importance of direct negotiations to de-escalate tariff disputes. United States President Donald Trump defended Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth after reports surfaced about Hegseth sharing classified information regarding a planned military operation against Houthi rebels in Yemen. Simultaneously, a U.S. airstrike in Sana'a, Yemen's capital, caused 12 fatalities. As reported by local health authorities, the strike occurred in a heavily populated residential zone. Turning to China, Premier Li Keqiang announced new measures to stimulate economic growth amidst concerns over slowing domestic demand and trade tensions with the U.S. These measures include tax cuts for small businesses and increased infrastructure spending. In the latest from Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau unveiled a new climate change initiative aimed at reducing carbon emissions by 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. The plan includes investments in renewable energy and a carbon tax on provinces that do not meet federal targets. Myanmar is grappling with the aftermath of a recent earthquake, with the full scale of devastation gradually emerging. Shifting focus to Bangladesh, the government expressed its hope that Rohingya refugees currently residing in the country will be able to return to their homes in Myanmar in time for Eid next year. However, persistent conflict in Rakhine State poses a significant obstacle to any repatriation efforts. Asian shares presented a mixed tableau, reflecting investors' anxieties concerning U.S. investment strategies and trade regulations under President Donald Trump's administration. A recent United Nations report brought to light the increasing international reach of scam centers originating in Asia, noting their expansion into regions including Nigeria, Angola, and Brazil, underscoring a disturbing trend in transnational crime. Across the Asia-Pacific region, the death of Pope Francis has spurred widespread mourning. In Timor-Leste, where over 95% of the population identifies as Catholic, the late Pope holds a special place as the first pontiff to visit since the nation achieved its independence. Even in Indonesia, a nation with a Muslim majority, condolences and support have poured in, with many remembering the Pope's compassion and humble demeanor. Pope Francis will be interred in the Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica, recalling his earlier gesture of waving to attendees before a mass in Cuba back in 2015. Turning to China, President Ruto's visit is seen as a symbolic win for the nation, especially given the backdrop of us tariffs and suspended aid, as Kenya weighs its options. Meanwhile, in Chile, gunmen targeted the Chinese-owned Rucalhu power plant site, a substantial $350 being developed by Rucalhu Energia SPA, a subsidiary of China International Water and Electric Corporation. The United States faces anticipated slower economic growth and heightened inflation, according to the International Monetary Fund, attributing this to President Trump's trade policies, notably the imposition of import taxes on major trading partners. Reportedly, President Trump's anti-LGBTQ stance is fueling similar sentiments and actions in both Hungary and Romania. In Hungary, many are also voicing concerns over Prime Minister Viktor Orban's increasing consolidation of power and measures aimed at suppressing protests. South Africa is currently battling a severe poaching crisis, prompting the establishment of a specialized wildlife CI school to aid in the apprehension of poachers. The relentless slaughter has resulted in the loss of over 10,000 rhinos since 2007. In El Salvador, a delegation of Democrats sought the release of Kilmar Armando Abrigo Garcia, a man deported from Maryland. However, the Salvadoran government denied their request to meet with him. Greece has unveiled a €1 billion package of financial benefits earmarked for lower-income households in the country's public investment program, following a reported budget surplus of 1.3%. Senegal is witnessing a shift in perceptions as Thierno Agna cultivates strawberries, challenging the notion that farming is solely for the old, poor, and uneducated, aiming to make it a more attractive profession. Spain has announced an €11 billion plan dedicated to meeting its NATO commitment to allocate 2% of its GDP to defense, with the Prime Minister asserting that Europe alone can ensure its own security. Ivory Coast saw police raids, as reported by Interpol, resulting in the rescue of 33 West Africans from a human trafficking ring that promised jobs in Canada in exchange for fees and forced labor. In Fiji, police are actively investigating an attack on a fishing vessel docked in Suva, where masked individuals assaulted the crew using spades, brooms, and even frozen fish. Sudan has witnessed a violent attack by paramilitary groups on a city within the Darfur region, leading to over 30 deaths and the displacement of thousands amidst the ongoing conflict. Bougainville, in Papua New Guinea, is taking a proactive stance in independence mediation, with Papua New Guinea setting expectations for their desired independence. Indonesia faces a potential environmental crisis, as a food plan carries a risk of causing extensive deforestation. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.